All
Good
right.
afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. This is Alan Smason, the president of AJPA, the American Jewish Press Association. And today we have a wonderful opportunity for those of you who have never before dealt with the concept of a podcast. Back in the old days, a podcast was very simple to understand. The term was called radio. These days, podcasts are on demand, and anytime that you want to be able to deal with a broadcast, you can just tune in and turn on, as it were. And of course, Hugo Ottolenghi is going to be introducing our guest today, who both of whom have dealt with podcasts and are continuing to do with podcasts, and explain to you how your media outlet can be better in forming your constituency, as it were, your readership by podcasts, and how podcasts can be utilized in a very effective basis. We hope that those of you who are tuned in today will be taking notes, and we will have an opportunity, I believe, at the end of the discussion between Hugo and Peter, who will be introduced shortly, that you'll be able to advance your own questions and have them answered by our guests. So with that, I'm going to bow out, and Hugo, please take it away.
All right. Well, good morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you happen to be right now. In the Zoom world, it's all the time. So yeah, thank you for coming to this session. I'm going to introduce Peter in just a moment. And by the way, during this, anytime you have questions, this is a conversation, this is a discussion. Anytime you have a question or an observation, please go ahead and make that. Don't feel like you're interrupting and you need to wait till the end. We want this to be as open as possible. We have a nice sized group here where we can all share. You can talk about your experiences. I'm going to go ahead and start by showing you the presentation itself. All right, so you should be able to see that now. So what we're going to talk about today are the 3 steps that you do to actually get into the podcast business or step up your game so far. One is producing, distributing, and marketing. And Peter and I are going to be talking about all 3 of those. The nice thing about podcasts is, unlike doing websites or even some of the social media like YouTube, podcasts are actually some of the easiest things to produce. The software that's out there for both producing and distributing has actually made it quite easy to do. And Peter's going to talk a lot about his experiences. So without further ado, I want to introduce you to Peter. He actually has a podcast that he does 3 times a week. He's a licensed non-practicing licensed real estate broker, and he's down here in South Florida like I am. And he's a journalist. He and I worked together at a publication called the Daily Business Review, where I was both banking and real estate editor, and he was a great, great banking writer. So Peter, why don't you say hello to everybody?
How's it going, everybody?
We're going to go through a couple of different things. Before we go any further, though, one thing that I wanted to ask folks is, who here is been doing podcasts? Tell us about what you've been doing, if you've been doing them. And if you haven't been, what is it that interests you in terms of getting into this? And I'm going to kind of go down the list, my list, which starts with Carrie.
Oh, hello. So I have been on podcasts, but currently I'm not producing, but I'm interested in them. And from all creative perspectives, I have many jobs. My main job today here, I'm representing myself as the advertising manager for the Jewish paper Nashville, and our editor is on as well. I feel like I don't want to speak for Barbara, but I feel like we're open to exploring any possible way to engage readers or listeners or our community. So I'm interested on so many angles, but for today, really focusing in our community and our paper and our reach.
Great, great. How about you, Tom?
I had a podcast for about 1.5 years with a friend that was about journalism. And although we had a great time and had great guests, I was never really satisfied with the production quality, and we never really were able to build it to a big enough number to attract sponsorship.
Okay. Okay. What about you, Barbara?
Hi. Well, as Carrie said, I'm the editor of the Jewish Observer. My journalism background initially is in radio. I used to be a news director of a public radio station in Los Angeles, where I'm from, and I hosted some shows here in Nashville for a long time before I was at the Observer. So, and I have hosted a podcast years ago. It was a parenting podcast, and I did it with another person, and we did it on one of those I don't know what it's called, but it was a platform that did everything for you. You uploaded your sound, they did the marketing and all of that. But I'd love to, as Carrie said, use the power of podcasting to reach more people in Nashville. And I think, as Tom just said, marketing is always the biggest challenge, I think, because the world has grown so much in the world of podcasting, and there's just a lot of noise out there. And so I think the biggest challenge for me is understanding how to utilize the technology to really capture our market. So that's kind of what I'm looking for.
How about you, Amy?
Yeah, we do podcasts here at Atlanta Jewish Times about once a month. Our production is pretty good. I think our subject matter is really good. What I would like to do would be to better market, get a greater audience, and really take advantage of sponsors. So
Okay.
that's a
All right.
those are big deals.
Sure. They always are. Alex.
Hi, I'm a program associate at the Shalom Hartman Institute. We, in 2020, have launched 2 podcasts, which are our first. One of them's weekly and one of them's bi-monthly, and or bi-week, twice a month. And I think our content we're really happy with, but we're interested both we're struggling with production quality, especially because our guests are often like not tech savvy academics. And then also we want to really start growing our audience beyond sort of our core base. And we're not, we often are, this is one of our first like big public products.
Cool. Cool. How about you, Marshall?
I kind of got into it backdoor. I didn't even realize I was doing a podcast. For 18 years, I've been reading the Jewish news for the radio reading service here for the visually impaired. And when COVID hit, they told us, of course, we couldn't come into the studio. So I got all the equipment to do it here. And then 18 years later, it hit me. This could just as well be a podcast. So we started putting it out as a podcast as well. And now I'm not just reading my own material or news around the Jewish world, but adding a little bit of commentary to it and opinions. And now that I've got the primitive stuff down, it's time to kind of take the next step and see what else I should be doing.
Well, good. We're going to help you take that next step. In fact, one of the things Peter and I were talking about, he was saying, you should be putting your articles into audio form. And you say, and adding a little bit of commentary and without editorializing, but adding something that enhances the quality and the content of having that article. Let's see here. Let's go to Red.
Hey, I'm Red from Red and Black. For those who may or may not be familiar, my sister and I write a monthly column for the Jewish Herald Voice here in Houston, Texas. So we always do not have a shortage of words. In fact, often at speaking engagements, we'll say getting us to talk is not the problem, getting us to shut up is the challenge. So podcasts just seem to be the logical next step, since people can read us and they're able to watch us, because we have some new animations coming up with our creatures, which is very exciting. So now we want our audience, hopefully new audiences, to be able to hear us. Sure, you'll ask Black to say her few words, so I'll stop there.
Oh, I see Black. All right, we'll go to Black next, and then we'll move back around. So, Mandy.
This is, and you can see what at least half of our animated creatures look like.
Nice.
I love now hiding behind these. And actually, everything we do is a story. We're storytellers. The whole concept of animation came from a meeting that we had with Hasbro. Our best-selling book was originally intended as the basis of a sitcom, and Hasbro said, no, it needs to be animated. As my sister said, we've been writing for the Jewish Herald Voice. I think we write monthly. I think the last column we wrote was number 128. So we have no shortage of content. We just launched a new website, redandblackbanter.com, and there's an assortment of videos and animation. And everyone says, we needed to bring our columns to life. One quick story, when we were proofreading our book, which is all banter between my sister and I, we were reading it out loud and of course editorializing as we went. And somebody in the next room was like, this needs to be recorded. And so we're finally getting around to doing podcasts.
Awesome. Awesome. Jessica.
I'm with AJPA, so I'm just listening in for now, but
Okay.
not planning on doing any podcasts anytime soon, but love listening. So I'll definitely check your guys' podcast out.
Once you find something that you like to talk about, it'll be easy to get started. All right, so let's finish with Cynthia.
Hi, I'm just here to learn. I always like to be open to new ideas. I don't have any intention right off of doing any podcast, but I figure knowledge is power and I'll start with gaining some. So thank you.
Very good. All right, so you kind of hit upon a couple of things that we wanted to address today. And one is producing your podcast. And as Peter and I were discussing it, he's the expert, so he's going to jump in here any moment ago. But Peter was saying there's two things that you really need to be concerned with when you're producing. Number one is that you have quality content. And mind you, the definition of quality means that you have information that's interesting to your audience. No one with a podcast is trying to capture the world. So think about the audience or the audiences that you want to reach with your podcast, and create information, or if you have a lot, find ways to convert it over to a podcast, things that are valuable, unique. And what I mean is it's something that you can do only, like the Red and Black. That's a great example of doing something unique. And you want it to become habit forming. You want people to get into the habit of listening and downloading and on a regular basis. This is going to take a little bit of time. Peter's going to talk about his experience. His is kind of taken off, but again, and everything that I've read, going to plan on investing 5 or 6 months before seeing results, which if you think about it in the podcast world or the technology world, it seems like a long time, but really it's not. If you think about all of your social media that's out there, if you just launched a Facebook page, it would take a while before you started getting followers. You'd have to do those things to push them out there. And when we get to the marketing part, which is going to be a big part of what we're going to discuss, we actually have a lot of ideas for you to do that. And we're drawing both on his marketing background, my marketing background, and the journalism background that we share. So this is kind of how Peter puts his together. Now you can see that Peter is not a graphic designer. He's a great thinker. He's a great talker. But this is what he sends out in his weekly emails. Actually, we get several a week. So he makes sure, and you can see this right here, that he's talking about a relevant topic, something that people need to know and be interested in right now. He gets knowledgeable guests. So Peter, tell him a little bit about the guest that's shown here.
This is the president of a bank. He runs about $3 billion in assets in Miami-Dade, Broward, Palm Beach County. He's part of a $17 billion institution. So I actually got him on board because some PR person pitched me because he wanted to be on my podcast because of the crowd I was hitting. So that's sort of how it goes. Think of the podcast the same thing as writing an article. It's virtually the same. The good part is it doesn't take you 4 hours. And you don't have to run down all these different sources. You basically have a one-on-one and you're able to put it out, edit it relatively quickly, market it. And before you know it, everybody's coming to you, including PR people trying to pitch you because they want to get on your podcast.
Right. And I think that brings us to our first marketing thing in terms of quality as well. I'm sure that you as journalists or in the work that you do, you have contacts that you have that you can get in touch with. And certainly getting the word out there, your marketing to say, hey, we've got this podcast and we're looking for guests. That's going to get you attention. And just letting them know, we have this thing, please get in touch with us and get involved and
Yes,
become
one
part of
just
our
one moment.
podcast. Hi, Amy. So you also want to have frequency. You notice down here at the bottom, Peter's got one where he does a condo market analysis on Monday. He does a roundtable on Wednesday, and he does a profile of a real estate player on Friday. And he keeps to that regular schedule. So one of the things that people get concerned about is production. So Peter, kind of walk us through how you put together yours, because you interviewed me and I couldn't believe how easy it was. And that's when I heard, when we were talking about this topic, I said, oh man, once Peter explains how quickly and easily you can put this together, it's actually going to come out pretty well. Go ahead.
All right. I guess probably the first place to start, just so everybody knows kind of where I'm coming from. I was a journalist. I did it for 13 years as a staff writer. Then I spent about 5 years writing a column for the Miami Herald and something called A Real Deal down here. It was written about real estate. And what I found is every time I wanted to do one of these columns, I had to report it out and research and this and that. And it would take me a hell of a lot of time. Versus being able to do a podcast, I could turn it relatively quickly, even with all the data. It was the editing, the whole process. So that's sort of where I'm coming from. Now, in terms of going ahead and you know what, Hugo, I got lost on that. I was thinking about something else. Remind me what the question is. I wanted to set the framework.
Yeah, certainly. Kind of walk us through about how you produce a podcast.
Oh, okay. Okay, so the way I produce it is effectively, I reach out to people I know. And this isn't anybody who does a podcast. This is effectively how they're going to do it. They're going to reach out to people they know. And then the people they know will turn you on to another source, just like you're reporting out an article. And the way I pitch it to them is say, listen, you get something interesting that I want to discuss. I want to take an hour of your time. And all of you are out there going to be like, an hour? Who the hell wants to talk for an hour? Well, what I will tell you is podcasts to me are much like Netflix series. If I don't see at least 2 seasons, I'm not going to watch it because I'm going to invest this time. And then lo and behold, it's going to leave me hanging. And a lot of podcasts, they'll tell you, do it 15 minutes, do it 10 minutes, whatever the case might be. I want an hour. And why do I want an hour? Because the first 20 minutes of my my program, I talk about the person. Who are they? What restaurants do they like? How they get in the business? What does the company do? Second 20 minutes, I talk about what's currently going on. And then the third 20 minutes, I talk about sort of what the future is. So anybody can pull the ripcord and eject at any moment in time, but I'm not going to underwhelm anybody because they're really curious about something. And all of a sudden I leave the subject sort of to go by the wayside. So that's the format going in. And what I find is I tend to get a demographic. Now, what I do is I do consulting, expert witness work, and I work with the potential buyers, Wall Street types. And what I find is if you do a podcast, especially the way I do it for an hour, you better know your stuff, because if you don't know your stuff, you're going to get outed very quickly, which is why I look at videos. It's almost like it's a dog and pony show. They're trying to hoodwink you because you can go out there for 3 minutes or whatever the case may be and get all the, it looks good and things like that, but there's no substance to it. Versus a podcast, you really kind of have to know what goes on. And the other side is the source. The source better know what they're talking about, because very quickly, you as a journalist, you're going to be able to smoke them out. So it becomes very interesting. But in terms of the production, it takes an hour, 15 minutes preview. Hey, this is what we're going to talk about. Yada, yada, yada. You got any questions? We do one recording if they have a problem or if they need to go to the restroom, something like that. I just tell them, leave the phone running. Doing it all on a phone, I send them a link. It's as simple as that. And then afterwards, because there's one recording, I splice it down into my 3 segments. I then do another review where if there's anything I need to edit out because of quality. And lo and behold, I'd say an hour and a half later, the whole thing's done. I put it up and then I just begin the marketing. And as Hugo mentioned, I put out these newsletters and I also use social media. And I've been live now since April the 1st. It took me an hour of, a month of ramp up time and 2 years of contemplating to do it. And once I've started it now, I got PR people pitching me. And I also have some people asking about possibly sponsoring some of the podcasts. And the beauty of the podcast is if you get somebody to sponsor you, you can go. It's not like TV where once it appears, it's sort of gone. You can then take all the ads and you could run them in all your original podcasts. And I got 60 and counting. So, you know, from a monetary perspective, you're not talking about big money, but if you're hitting everybody for 25 to 50 bucks for a commercial per segment, you're doing 3 a week, you go back 6 months, you can see where suddenly, you know, it'll pay for itself. It's beer money, if you will.
Very good. Any questions on this? So like when Peter was interviewing me, we just took it in a conversational style. We're just chatting, right? It's like we're just talking about this and that. But Peter's really doing it as a journalist, like he said, you know, pulling in and asking good questions, sometimes tough questions, ones where the person who, like you say, this bank president is going to have to answer serious questions about what's happening in the particular area that he knows. And so this is really good. You can also have, like I say, if you're doing the two of them, red and black, you can have a conversation, but there should be something intriguing on that. There should be that conversation that goes back and forth. And in fact, if any of you are subscribers to the New Yorker, I think it was the last issue before the one that I got received yesterday, had a whole article about two people who have been working together. It says, I think it's called "You Think You Know or You're Wrong About." I should have had that copy of it with me here. But basically, they have a conversation about the things you think you know actually aren't correct. And so they examine the facts. And it's an interesting conversation on a subject. And I think that's another point, is to have yes.
When Peter said that he sends a link and that it's just done over the phone, can you be specific about the technology involved in that?
Sure.
So it yields a good result, production-wise?
Sure. Hugo, you want me to answer that, or do you want to say something?
No, you're on the production side.
Okay. So let me give you the background related to that, and just because I think I'm going to be able to clear up some of maybe the misconceptions or some of the smoke or fog out there. The reason it took me 2 years to get a podcast going is it was going to be I was going to have to spend money on it, and I didn't know if I was going to be committed to it. So who wants to spend money if they're not going to be committed? So eventually, after 2 years, a friend of mine who does a podcast, he put me in touch with his guy, and everybody's got a guy. So I sit down with his guy, and his guy tells me it's going to cost me $5,000. And I say, $5,000? I don't even know if I'm going to do this thing. Why would I spend $5,000 on it? So he says, I'll tell you what, try it on your own. There's been some advancements in software. And as a result, if you like it and you really want to make it Hollywood pizzazz, then you come to me, you spend the $5,000, we get you in a studio, we do all that type of stuff. So I said, okay, fine. So what do you recommend? He says, go to Anchor. I said, what's Anchor? It's anchor.fm. And what he said is, listen, Spotify, Apple Music, everybody, they don't want to necessarily pay for royalties when they're playing the songs that you're listening to on Spotify. They want to create their own content that they can run ads against. So as a result, Spotify bought Anchor. They're basically embracing it. They're giving it firepower. They're distributing it throughout the Spotify network. And they're also handling the process, which used to be a real pain, to get you on Apple and Google and sort of everywhere else. So because of this break in technology and this commitment to podcasts going forward, suddenly overnight, it became easy to do, and it's easy to do on a smartphone. That's all you need. So the way you would work it is if you use Anchor, which is the app I'm using, it's free, doesn't cost anything. You'll simply set up a new file, which will be a new recording. You will then say, I want to invite a friend. When you invite a friend, you could send them you could do it by telephone. You can do it by an email link to their computer. You can do it by a whole variety of different ways. They give you WhatsApp. They give you text. Yeah. Basically anything and everything. That person who then receives it, they'll click on the link to say, yes, they want to accept. They want to join. They put in their first name, if you will. As soon as they do that, they then join the podcast. That's how simple it is. The only thing you really need is an internet connection.
Yep. Yeah, that's how Peter and I did. But he was like, okay, so we're going to do it. What did we use? What was the app that we used? One of the apps. And,
yeah, well, we used Anchor, and if anybody out there has a problem, because sometimes you run into somebody, they're in a bad spot and they don't have a good internet connection. There's a backup called Rev, R-E-V, like rev up the motorcycle. So Rev, what it does is it's effectively a conference call that you can use. And if you're a journalist, you effectively could call somebody you're conference calling, it's being recorded, and you tell the person, hey, I'm recording you, blah, blah, blah. You're going to have this conversation while you're reporting out a story. And lo and behold, you can then take Rev, you can forward it to Anchor, and lo and behold, that conversation you had for reporting out a story could effectively be a podcast if you just put like an intro on it.
This is Black. I also want to chime in that Rev has got a great transcripting.
Yes.
So that you could take any of your podcasts or interviews and automatically download it into like a Word document or whatever, WordPress or whatever you use, and from there, and also slice and dice it and take pieces of it out over social media.
We're going to talk about taking those little slices and using them in promotion. So that's kind of, Peter brought us to something that's the big thing that you should know, and that is that in terms of distributing your podcast, it has become much easier. Like you say, with Spotify buying Anchor.fm, they have now put it out there on Spotify. Apple Podcasts is the big place to put it on, right? But there's a whole bunch of others, Google Play, Google Podcasts, Spotify, TuneIn. And one of the nice things that has happened, and this is just kind of a model, this is what Transistor.fm, which is another one of the ones that is out there. This is how they describe how it works. So basically what you do is you copy your podcast RSS feed link into the, my mistake, into the feed, right? Then it goes out and you submit your information to the aggregator just once. And then after that, it takes care of sending it to all the different places out there. Man. And so you don't have to worry about trying to send it out to every single one. It will, after you get this set up the first time, it automatically updates. So when Peter gets done with one of his episodes, he just puts it into the system and it automatically gets sent to everybody else. And this saves a lot of time and trouble. And this is one of the big changes that has happened recently with the popularity of podcasts. Everybody wants to be in on it. And so therefore, they're now taking that.
And Hugo, if I could chime in.
Sure.
So what I would suggest to everyone, and this came from the $5,000 guy who was going to set me up. What he said is when you go through Anchor, basically Anchor is going to run your podcast through Spotify only. Now, what you can do is when you're ready, you then reach out for acceptance, almost like you want to join the island, like Survivor. And what he said is, he said, build up a track record, because a lot of people will do 1, 2, 3 podcasts and they'll leave it by the wayside. And, Apple and everybody else is getting overwhelmed with, false starts, if you will. So he said, build up a portfolio, if you will. And once you do that, then you apply to each of them. And as you do, they see you have this portfolio and you're going to be given more importance and you'll be cleared rather than going in early, getting rejected, and then having to reapply. So it looks like it's automatic, but what you'll do is you'll, like an Anchor, I have to send an email to Anchor, say, hey, listen, I want you to reach out to Apple. I want you to reach out to Google. I want you to reach out to whoever. So they give you the ability to tell them when to go ahead and act on your behalf and try to get you on the various networks.
And one of the things you should certainly do is start with no fewer, let's get our AP style right, no fewer than 3 podcasts to begin. You want to build up a bank so that you actually can show them that you're serious about what you're doing. Again, the great part of it is because you're in the communication business, whether you're producing news or producing commentary or whatever it is, these are things that you do every single day. And so you really don't have to think about, oh my gosh, how am I going to fill my next hour? Where am I going to find things to produce that will be in there? One of the conversations Peter and I were having is, he says, how you have to contact, 4 or 5 sources for a good story. Well, each one of those can be a podcast. And one of his great observations was, and I have to give him full credit on this because it was like, yes, the lights went on in my head, was that you might do an interview with somebody and you might use maybe 1 or 2 quotes from that person, but you might have spent a half hour or an hour interviewing them. Well, why take that stuff and put it aside? Make a podcast out of it. Take that interview where you got lots of good information, just didn't fit into the article, and use it in your podcast. Right there, one news story or commentary could produce for you several podcasts. And so you don't have to sit there and worry about, oh my gosh, where am I going to find my next topic?
You know, and one of the things that's maybe sometimes, you know, everybody want, you know, we're all focused now because of Facebook and Twitter. How many likes do I have? How many followers? How many this? How many that? All the research I've done, just to give you context, suggests that the typical podcast gets about 150 listens. That's it, 150 listens. The Joe Rogan and everybody else are getting millions. That's a different story. But initially it starts off slow. It's grassroots, unless you're going ahead and like buying Twitter followers. But you start off grassroots and then people start spreading it. I started off when, again, April 1st, I put up my first podcast. Wasn't really sure what I was going to do. Now, you know, I'll upload it at, I don't know, 11 o'clock at night. In the morning, I'll check and I'll have 150 listens that quickly. And then from there, word spreads and then PR firms reach you. And you know, it's endless as to what you can sort of do with it. And the way I use it, and this is just a suggestion for everyone, you know, red and black, it sort of comes to mind. You're effectively a brand, and whatever publication you work for, you're working for them, kind of like a player, like an NBA player playing for a particular team. LeBron James, he can go wherever he wants, but LeBron is the brand, if you will. And I would say, if you look at yourself as a brand, and this podcast is a very cheap, effective, efficient way for you to help spread your shadow, if you will, your reach. And then whatever publication you're working for, it's almost like hand in hand, rather than the publication, you know, they're the one with the flag and you're simply working, you know, your infantry under the flag. So that's the way I use it, because it's free and it's cheap, and I can do it real quick.
Any questions? All right. I hope this means we're doing a good job so far.
Yeah. Can I ask, what is the cost involved in this? You say it's cheap, so what are we talking?
Your internet connection, your phone, and then whatever it costs to charge your battery.
Okay, so relatively no charge.
There's absolutely nothing.
Nothing from what's already in place for most everybody with their internet, with their phones, and so yeah. So the platform itself costs next to nothing, or it's free, whatever you want to say. Okay.
Yeah, it's a free download, and if you don't want to take the tact of trying to go ahead and get sponsors, because that was referenced earlier, Anchor actually gives you an option where they will give you the language. You read the language, you insert it in your podcast, and they will pay you up to $15 per podcast based on how many listens you get. So they'll even take it that step further.
So does it go by the downloads? How does that work in terms of your listenership?
They're monitoring it just like if you've ever used Google Analytics.
Yes.
They will monitor it. They'll tell you how many active users you have. They'll listeners. They'll tell you how many listens you've had in its entirety. They'll tell you what your demographics are. They'll tell you what country, what city, what time of day, whether they're male, they're female, they're other. It's think Google Analytics, but effectively for podcasts.
Gotcha.
Very sophisticated.
But it's called Google Analytics for podcasts, or Google.
Well, I'm saying the Google Analytics. If you've ever used that, it's going to be the same concept, but it's all under Anchor. Anchor's the brand I use, and there's various other ones out there. I just used Anchor because the $5,000 setup guy told me that's the one he would recommend. So I just, I took him at his word, and so far I've had no complaints whatsoever. It's been so easy. So I would tell you, one of the biggest challenges you'll run into is when you're setting this up, it has to do with royalties. I'm going to take music, I'm going to use it. Lo and behold, Google is going to take me down, whatever the case may be. So that was my biggest startup. So what I did is I do construction, I do condos. So I went out to a construction site. I parked the car, turned on my memo recording on my phone, and just recorded construction workers yelling and pounding and stuff like that. And I use that as to avoid royalties, so I wouldn't get, blacklisted or anything. Now, what's happened is this week, Spotify announced you can now use all the Spotify musics. So whether it's Cardi B or anybody, you can use that music on your podcast with no royalty issues. Now, what I would tell you is I haven't used it, but the thing to keep in mind is if you decide to take your podcast elsewhere, I don't know what impact that would have in terms of the music royalties, because Spotify's already paying for it. But that would be your only issue, is creating the file, call it file sound and and file ads, if you will. I run my own ads against my my podcast.
And you said you get as much as $50 a broadcast?
Oh, well, no, the way I've seen it, the way I'm looking at it. So I have 4 segments of my podcast. I have an intro, then I have a talk about who the source is, what's going on in the market, and then the 4th one is what's the future. So I run ads in between, and I run 30-second ads, but I've been talking to developers about it, and I'm looking at $25 to $50 for a 30-second ad to appear within one of the segments of my podcast. And they're not flinching because it's so small, 25, and it stays up there for effectively, until I decide to take it down. And I can add it to previous podcasts, which have been very successful. I just did one with the author of a book called Hotel Scarface. It's about the cocaine industry and how the money got into real estate. Let me tell you, the people reaching out are just like insane. I'm getting all these comments. I'm getting this, I'm getting that. That's a perfect ad potentially for whoever the user is. Maybe somebody selling flooring. I can take an ad, I can run it up against it. And I know it's just going to keep running and running and running. And so you can adjust it. It gives you the ability to work in the back end like a Wizard of Oz. And you don't have to rely on anybody. No one except your smartphone and internet connection. And you don't even have to be tech savvy because I'm not. I'm not a coder. I'm nothing like that.
And I'm going to move out of the way, but last question. Most of the times you see people doing podcasts, they have special microphones that seem to be very expensive.
Yep.
That's not required, correct?
Nope. Nothing's required. The only time sometimes you run into an issue is if you're doing an interview with someone and they're using Wi-Fi versus LTE or cell service. What I notice is sometimes someone's Wi-Fi will drop for a split second and they'll get knocked out, and then they have to go ahead and rejoin the conversation. But no microphone's necessary. You can have one if you want, but it's not necessary. It's like having a telephone call. That's it. No different than a telephone call.
Right. Just when Peter and I did ours, I just went to a quiet room of the house, closed the door, put my phone down. I think I had the phone with me. I just held it up and I talked into the phone, and Peter got the whole recording that way. It was actually like interviewing was like having a phone conversation. And again, any of you who are doing reporting and stuff, it's actually like talking to your sources. You just kind of plan out ahead what it is that you want to ask, so that when you put it together, you've got this one source podcast, which is a lot of the time what the podcasts are going to be. Sometimes you're going to have 2 people conversing, but again, nothing special. I've got one of these Google Pixel phones. That's all I've got. And I heard Peter clearly, and he heard me clearly.
So can you also use other, instead of, if you don't have a smartphone or something, which I know most of us do, but can you use it through an iPad doing something like FaceTime or, okay.
Computer, iPad, anything. They give you options. You can send a link via text. You can send it through WhatsApp. You can just copy the link and distribute it however you want to distribute it. There's all that you can do it through Facebook Messenger. It's just like anything. Think about if you're sending a picture to somebody, like a friend, and you get all those different options. It's the same exact way, but this is going to be a link for a podcast.
Excellent.
Okay, sorry. Didn't mean to.
No, go ahead. Sorry.
This is Black. What I was going to say is, obviously, we all have Zoom. Zoom has an option for you to save your file as an audio only, and the quality of the Zoom calls has drastically improved. And it also gives you another option if you want then to have the video where you could take a snippet from it. So you might want to consider that.
Yeah, I would just, Black, if I could. So I like to say I have a face for radio. And what I know is from doing Zoom conversations and interviewing people, if I wanted to interview them with Zoom, there's going to be pushback simply because the background, how do they look? What are they wearing versus an audio? You can get somebody at 9 o'clock at night. They just finished dinner. They're sitting around on the couch doing the conversation. My experience has been that it's much easier if it's just audio rather than incorporating the video aspect, because then people tend to tense up. But that's been my experience.
We use Zoom, and it seems to work really well because it's like a conversation. So
Okay.
the person being interviewed and the interviewer, they can look at each other. And it just seems to be more interactive that way.
We
it,
also
got it.
use Zoom, but will like often have problems with people's Wi-Fi and the recording like being much, more noisy and difficult than if we have people record on their phones.
Okay. These are all good things. And again, you try the way that you find that works.
Peter,
And again, I think Peter's point earlier is that the person needs to be in a place where they have a good signal. That's the most important thing, right? If they have a weak Wi-Fi signal or a weak phone signal, then that's when you start to get degradation. Remember, one of the things about this is it's just the spoken word. So from a technical standpoint, it occupies a very narrow bandwidth. Think of it as like AM radio, right? That's what AM radio was for years. We're not trying to do music quality recording. We're just trying to produce good sound with very, very good content.
And that's the thing I would offer. I mean, what I do, like I said, I'm going to post number 60 on Friday, my 60th podcast. What I do is I say, listen, I'm just figuring this out. I'm not an expert in this. I'm not Hollywood. I'm not any of that. I'm trying to give you great conversation, cut through all the hype that's out there and give you straight talk. And the audience, because it's kind of gritty and it's grassroots and it's authentic, versus like in my industry, real estate, you got a lot of pretty people who are polished and it looks Hollywood-esque, but there's no substance. And people will, they'll go towards, and I think that's why I'm having some real success, because, they're used to getting all the polished stuff with no substance. All of a sudden they're getting mine, which is gritty, kind of right in your face. We laugh about it. We say, the only thing we're looking for straight talk. And if you have salty language and you curse, it's not a big deal to us. So just take down all parameters and let people know it's going to be a straightforward conversation. And I think that is, the niche that I've hit. And I think that's some of the success. And, you're all journalists. I'm sure if you were to just, put that out there, you're not trying to be Hollywood. You're not trying to compete against Steven Spielberg or anybody else. People will understand it and they'll take it for being authentic and grassroots. And that's really what they want. They want something that's authentic, my opinion.
Peter, do you know, we used to have our shows on Anchor, and the problem we were having was that you can only have one RSS feed per login. Do you know if that's still the case? Can you only have one show?
You know what? I haven't. No, I don't. My experience is no, that's no longer the case, because I set up one that I was going to do just about crazy stuff in Miami, restaurants, things like that, and it allowed me to do it. Now I don't know if I use the same email address or not. But no, yeah, I registered too.
Because I know that used to be the case, and eventually we just moved to a different platform that lets us have multiple RSS. I mean, it's a pay service, but we want to have multiple shows, and we do fee for service, like as a fee for service option for community agencies in the Twin Cities of producing podcasts. So we had to sort of have everything in one place just to make my life easier.
Yeah. So. Absolutely. Don't get me wrong. You got to put in hours in order to get this done. I'm not talking. I'm not talking about everybody else. You have to spend the time to set up the interviews. Yeah. You have to prepare for the interview. You have to edit it. You have to. You get emails after the case. So it consumes a lot of time. But once you get to that tipping point, it's just like it's automatic. It doesn't even take anything. And that's why when I was talking with Hugo, I said, oh my God, if I was a journalist back today, back then you had the micro cassette recorder and you had to listen to it and this and that and all that type of stuff. I would have just been recording every single conversation. I would have then written my story off of it, and I would have put up a podcast, and I would have done it over and over and over. 4 sources on a story. That would have been 4 podcasts, and just a frequency. And it doesn't have to be exactly an hour. It doesn't have to be 15 minutes. It can be an hour and 7 minutes, whatever the case may be. Just put it up. And you'll see, you'll have people following you. It'll be grassroots. And before you know it, like Black and Red we're talking about, the thing, tell us when to shut up, because you can just go on and on and on and on and on, which I think you can all see I do.
All right, before we run out of time, let's talk about marketing your podcast, because everyone was asking questions about that. The nice things is, and I was thinking about this on the back end. I said, okay, so like Peter's been real successful. He's gotten this off, but you can see Peter's a great talker. So his interviews go well. He's also a great marketer. The good news is you already have a lot of the tools you need. So let's think about your organization. So you already have a website, right? So what you do is you build a landing page for the podcast, and you put a sign-up form on there. That's the easiest thing to do. The hard part's building the website, adding a page. And I can tell you, because I do a lot of websites, is a fairly easy one. Promote on social media. You already have social media out there. And we talked about a couple of different ways you can promote it. So like on Instagram, you can share a clip. And if you don't want to put the video part of it on there, that's fine. Share some images, share something interesting, and run a short little clip. And again, put something in the bio that has the link to the podcast or how to sign up for the podcast. One of the big things to do, and this is kind of an interesting one, is a lot of times as journalists, you're interviewing someone who is a whole lot more famous than you. So when you get done, you tell them that it's out there, this interview, and get them to share it with the people in their audience. And so therefore you amplify yourself. So if you've got 100 followers, but they've got 15,000 or 50,000, it's going to now reach 50,000 people that are following that person.
Hugo, if I could interrupt, just give you a real life example. So I got pitched by a PR firm out of London because they represented somebody who oversaw the United States for the largest bank out of Canada. I went ahead, I did the podcast. They then asked if they could link to it because they wanted to promote it. Now, all of a sudden, anybody who goes to Royal Bank of Canada's website, there's a particular area, they're all seeing my podcast. So that's a perfect example of it, Hugo.
Yep. You should create a teaser for every episode. And this is something that tells people what's coming up and what's in it. Now, your news organization, or you may already have a newsletter, add that into your newsletter. Just kind of like the way Peter has. Here's what we're doing now. Here's what's coming up tomorrow. Here's what's coming up next week. Put that into your newsletter. Right? Optimizing your show for search. If you already have some experience, you don't really need to learn much more about Google and how to optimize it. You want to get some of those keywords in there. And by the way, Google now has all sorts of tools that will help you do that. All right, so I get, because I subscribe to 6, 7, 8, whatever it is, newspapers or magazines, I get daily updates from all of them. That podcast should be right in that daily news summary. Not necessarily up at the top, but hopefully it'll be one of the featured items. And if not, it should be down there at the bottom. Right? If you're printing or producing digital editions, there should be in-house ads for the podcast. And the nice thing is, in a digital edition, you can actually embed that link. All right, so you should cross promote. All right, so we were talking about this just before we began. The AJPA can help with that. We need to create something so that all the podcasts have a place where they exist on other platforms. Promote it to the interest groups. Think about your audiences. Who might be interested in this? Get out there and let them know. One other thing that you can think about in terms of interest groups is, how do you use LinkedIn? Every time that you produce a podcast, make sure that something on that goes into your LinkedIn. Find groups on LinkedIn that you're a part of or that you feel would be fit your audience, and make sure that you're sharing it with that group. Hey folks, I'm interviewing this person. My podcast is coming up. Here's the link to it. You can go do that. Shares and recommendations. Peter was talking about acceptance, getting you're accepted into the other ones. One of the criteria for getting the word out or getting into some of these others is them being able to see data that your podcast is being shared and that people are recommending that. Okay. So all of these things are pretty much a lot of things that you're already doing. You just need to apply them now to podcasts, right? You've got a newsletter. You can put an in-house ad. Remember the old days of newspapers, in-house ads? Well, now they're for products that are digital. As Peter pointed out, leveraging the person that you're interviewing, their fame. They can help you amplify your voice because they can share it through all the contacts that they have. Who knows? Maybe they'll do an email blast on your behalf, and you'll be able to. Yeah.
Just to follow up on that, one of the things I do that we're having some success with, and I'm ripping off everyone else's idea. If any of you listen to NPR, they do the roundups on Friday. They got the reporter roundup. So I do that where I bring on current and former journalists once a week. We talk about the biggest headlines. These are people I know. So all of journalists, do a podcast once a week where you just talk to them, or once a month, about the biggest things going on, and everybody's sitting around bullshitting effectively. But it's very interesting to the audience. You'd be surprised how much they're going to just eat that up.
Absolutely. And I'm certain that you have certain people that you know on a regular basis that they would be great to have a conversation with, because people listen for two reasons. One, for education, and the other part of it is for entertainment.
Yep.
And when you can mix the two and you can give it that style, it doesn't feel like a lecture. It doesn't sound like a real formal kind of, 60 minutes kind of interview. When you can, the podcast runs right down the middle of that road. And when you've got interesting people, I had to laugh when Peter mentioned that, because I see the faces on his promotion for that. Yeah, and they're people that we used to work together with. So yeah, actually, I know who he's talking to. And that's the thing about it. You may have former colleagues. You may have people who have become good sources for you that you talk to on a regular basis. You get them and create this little roundtable. That's what they do on A1 on NPR every Friday morning, right? And it's a big hit for them. Before we run out of time, because we don't want to keep you, we know that people get Zoom fatigue after an hour, but we're willing to go a little longer. I just wanted you to see, these are just some of the ones that are out there, and there are many, many more that they are doing things. And this is how they promote their work on Instagram, right? They've got what Peter talked about. They've got branding that they put out there, which you already have for what it is you do. Right? Red and black, you've got your animation. Well, there's your branding right there for your podcast. You don't have to do anything else. Just transfer it over to what you're doing. It's all there and ready for you to go. And lastly, and we're going to send out this PowerPoint after we're done here, Laura will send it to you. We wanted to include some things where you can do some more reading. We were able to cover some things, but a lot of the details that you might have questions about are really captured in most of these. Medium, Castos, and Spotify and Transistor all get into not only how to produce, but also how to promote. And they have really good tips. And you just pick, as Peter says, you're not really ripping them off. They're putting them out there because they have an interest in making you as successful with your podcast as possible. And if you were with us for the first session that we did, we talked about Later, which is a way of managing social media. And Later, it shows how you can promote your podcast on Instagram. This is something that, again, you don't need to learn a whole lot to do this. You need just to take the good tactics that these people are offering them and apply them to the work that you're doing. And again, think about this. A lot of what you do now, or what you're set up to do, easily allows podcasts to be integrated. There isn't a whole lot of work to adding a website, to adding a digital ad, to putting something at the bottom of a newsletter, adding something to an Instagram, right? This is just more content for your Instagram. And it works for you. And it has the benefit of building audience. And through Instagram, there can be a lot of sharing. And it starts simple. Don't try to say, well, let me do all 101 tactics that Medium suggests. Let me do 3, let me do 5, let me build it up. Get it going. I'm sure, Peter, for you, there was that learning curve, and now, you're a pro, but you certainly went through that period where you had to figure it out as you went along.
Absolutely. But what I will tell you though is it's so much easier. Like when I was writing the columns, I had to dedicate so many hours to doing a column. Today, instead of writing a column, what I would do is I would simply do a podcast. I do a once a week podcast with someone, and I bet the amount of listens would be much greater than the number of reads. And the reason being is I think the way our lifestyle is, I haven't had a newspaper subscription since 2010. And the reason is that, I'm constantly doing something. What I love about podcasts is I'm cooking, I'm gardening, I'm walking, anything. I'm always listening to a podcast, and it's all around us. You don't realize how much you listen to the radio. But if there's something interesting to listen to, you're just going to get addicted, and you're going to tell everyone else, and it's going to go on and on and on. So I think it's endless opportunities going forward about it. So why not start immediately? You should have started last week is what I would tell you.
All right. So you may have questions afterwards. You can email me, of course, and you can get in touch with Peter and talk to him some more. We're both available to help you, to listen, to give you feedback. We really want to make sure that you can be successful and that you're happy in your work. And so what do you guys think? Okay, no one thinks it's a good idea. That was easy.
I think this was great. It was very informative and filled in a lot of blanks for me. So thank you for that. And I feel like it's very encouraging and inspiring. So yes, thanks.
Yeah, definitely took out some of the intimidating features that I was thinking about in terms of the technology and how to make this all happen. So definitely going to check out some of these websites you recommended.
Yeah, take a look at it. Like I say, I was, when Peter said he wanted to interview me, I was kind of intimidated. I'm like, oh man, I need to get out because I do some recording. So I'd invested, in a nice quality microphone. I've got a pop filter, and I thought I had to do all this stuff to be interviewed. And Peter goes, no, I'm just going to send you a link. You click on that, and we start talking. And I was like, that's it. And honestly, when we first started, I was like, is this working, Peter? And he's like, yeah, keep going. And that's how when I realized, I said, my gosh, this really works well. And again, we're not trying to produce, as Peter said, we're not trying to produce Hollywood quality stuff. What people are interested is in good content, right? If you have the microphone already, and I forget who I saw earlier, maybe I forget who it was. I saw someone there's the microphone. Yeah. And I'm like, okay, that's great. But truthfully, you can do it with 2 smartphones. That's all you need, really.
We had, when like pre-COVID, like our main podcast, it started as like a Q&A article series. And I decided that this is stupid. It's a waste and it should be a podcast because it's way more interesting to hear the conversation. Mm-hmm. We had invested in like a decent, I started doing it in voice memos on my phone, but then realized I got a decent digital recorder, and like the mics, like this mic is not a very expensive, it's an XLR and USB mic, and it's not that expensive. I mean, right. There are mics that people use that are in the hundreds. I think these were maybe 50 or 60 bucks a piece.
Right.
And now, I mean, I have the, this fancy looking arm thing, but that was 15 bucks. And that was a, nice. That was a mid-COVID purchase, because instead of doing face-to-face interviews, I'm doing them from my desk, or I'm going upstairs to a closet if I need a quiet place. And it's just a much easier setup to have. And I mean, this works. This is what I had done a lot of them on, but for the expense, if you're going to really once you really get into it and decide to invest, you get a reasonably priced microphone. You don't have to go into the hundreds by any means. No.
In fact, the microphone and the pop filter I got, I think cost me a total of $75, and I bought them through Amazon.
Yeah.
And it was just like yours with the USB. I just plugged it into my laptop, and the quality is great. The quality is just fine. And again, remember, people are listening on their devices, and Peter talked about they're walking around. There's all sorts of noise around them. So it's not as if they're listening, they're expecting crystal clear, because there's also ambient noise outdoors around them. And so it's not they're sitting like in some perfect, quiet, soundproof room listening to, perfect, wide range music. This is just speaking, which actually happens in a very narrow band.
And have fun with it. Sometimes we've had birds in the background, and somebody will write in an email, hey, what's up with the birds? And we'll say, hey, listen, this is the way we're doing it. Just roll with it. Roll with it. People they're not looking for Hollywood unless you position it like it's going to be Hollywood, which I don't do. I try to lower the bar, and therefore they love it.
One of the shows that we actually produce on our network that I'm just the producer and editor of, one of my colleagues is the host. She was interviewing somebody on, I think it was the Upper West Side of New York, somewhere in New York City, like really when COVID was at its worst, and she was sitting in her apartment, the window is open, and every few minutes you would hear ambulances, first responders go by, you would hear birds chirping in the wind, like it's fine. Yeah. Every once in a while, my dog will start running around and barking, like it's fine. It used to worry me, but then I realized how much I enjoyed listening to podcasts that were done, like interviews that were done live, even with good equipment, but live in like a restaurant or in a live setting. It's less sterile.
Right. And as Peter said, it feels more authentic, right?
Real. Yeah.
Yeah, it's more real. And that's one of the things we're looking for. And it's what Peter said, people are looking for authenticity. And a podcast convey that.
Yeah. It's interesting because like lately, all the talk shows at night they're Zooming with people, and and people are dressing more casually. And so everything has changed. And
Yes.
and I like it better, actually. I feel it's not so like phony anymore.
Yeah.
You see people's homes, you're hearing my phone, but it feels, I like it because I feel it has a sense of authenticity and realness.
Absolutely. Yeah, and one
I
of
would
the-
like to add one thing. I just really
Sure.
want to thank everybody because I mean, I don't know about Red, but I've gotten like phenomenal ideas just generating off of everybody's comments. Just
Likewise.
well, now you've got me thinking that, you know, Red and I end up having like a morning conversation between the two of us, just like, okay, what's going on? And I mean, it could be as simple as just recording that. So, I mean, so you've given us some,
Yeah.
not that we don't have enough content already, but you've given me some great ideas and Red's probably cringing right now because idea, she panics.
Yeah, my most feared words are coming from Black, quote unquote. I was thinking, and that's when I know I don't drink, but I need to start.
Yeah.
So,
Well, and I was thinking it's so great that suggestion that you to use full-length interviews, because I've done some wonderful interviews and you know you need a couple of lines for a quote and then I've got all this stuff that no one else will ever hear but me. So you know, I love that. And of course I share that stuff with people, but it's nice to be able to share it, you know, in a formal setting like a podcast.
Just think if you could take all those reporters' notebooks that are stacked up somewhere, and you could convert them into interviews. And you know, Peter's been through it, I've been through it, you've been through it, Barbara. You know, you have these fascinating conversations, and you realize this is really good stuff, but it just doesn't have a place in this story.
Yeah.
But I wish I could share it with people.
Yeah.
And this is a way to do it. And again, it's part of what your day would be anyway, right?
Yeah.
So, and the technology makes it fairly easy to take it over and say, okay, well, I got to do a little bit of editing. But again, we're not doing for Hollywood fancy kind of stuff. You don't want to make it so smooth that it seems too polished.
Yep.
Like the ums and the uhs and the breaks and the sirens in the background, they all add to the authenticity. It makes it feel like a live discussion.
I also like the idea how it can cross-pollinate with everything we do at our paper.
Yes.
And now we have a Facebook page, and, you know, and we try to reach a younger audience, and sometimes we just can't grab them, but maybe one podcast would, which might lead them to something else. So I feel like it really can each will enhance the other.
Right. And think of it this way. Think of the podcast as Peter was talking about as an extension of your brand. And it's a way to bring in audiences that aren't going to read what you have.
Right.
But what if you could take some of that same content and share it to them in this podcast format? Because as you can tell, the younger generation is very much attached to their phones and to their apps. So you're going to where they're at, which is that.
Yes.
Well,
Okay,
what I found
sorry.
really interesting is that the number of comments, particularly from people who are my age or younger, and I'm 45 for what it's worth, my age or younger, who I would have thought would have been in this sort of sweet spot of podcast, have said to me, "Oh, you know, I really wish that the Who the Folk podcast was an article, was just the Q&A again."
Huh.
And I'm like, really? You don't? No, like that. First of all, no, that's too much work. Second of all, it's way more interesting as like a 30-minute interview where there's, you know, expression and emotion and character, as opposed to just flat, you know, it's a difference between 2D and 3D.
Yeah. No, there's no tone in a printed Q&A, unless you can really try to capture it with the right kind of editing. But with a podcast, it comes naturally. It's built in.
Yeah.
Okay, I've got a question because I kind of want to flip this around slightly. If, let's just say you guys weren't already sold on doing your own podcast, but yet you wanted to interview Red and I. And we said, we'd love to do an interview. Would you mind if we recorded it because we want to use it as a podcast? What would your reaction be? Would you be willing to let us do that?
Probably.
Barbara, you've got like, you know, stacks of people you've interviewed. I mean, how would you have reacted like I want to do my own podcast days?
I think it would probably be okay.
Yeah. Like my only question is, in order for it to be effective, you have to reverse the role of interviewer and interviewee, right? Because the interviewer is the one who's controlling the content, And so if the person, I think would be more like what Peter was saying, is that you'd want to share the link with them and say, share that with your audience. If you guys want to do a program where you're talking to us about what's red and black all about, that would be a different kind of podcast.
Well, no, I was thinking way back when before we started writing for the Jewish Herald Voice, when Michael Duke actually interviewed us. And I would have loved to been able to take his interview, what he found he wanted to ask, not what we wanted to be asked.
Yes. Yeah, because he's
so my thought is if like you or Barbara or Marshall or whomever said, okay, we want to interview you. How'd you get the company started? Why would you turn your sister's crisis into a book? And so what you want to know, because most likely that's what other people want to know. I mean, because you're journalists. I mean, this is what you do. You're trying to find answers versus being told what, being marketed to, or feeling like, okay, this is what we think you need to know about us. No, it's kind of like if somebody wants to interview us, I'm trying to figure out if I wanted to turn it around, say, well, can we make it into a podcast? What would your reaction be?
I would do it every time if I were you, because that's just another podcast for you.
Oh, I'm willing to do it. The question is, I don't know how that's why I said I was kind of flipping it around. What would, your reaction be?
Make your acceptance contingent on.
Well,
that's a good
depends.
idea.
I mean, if I don't have a podcast and you have a podcast, sure, why not? Especially because you could turn it around and say, we're going to be on the other side of the table right now. We want to share that with you, which is an unusual experience. So I think it could be really fun for listeners to hear you guys be interviewed, since you're not the ones that they hear doing that stuff.
Hey, I turned my sister's life into a book, so we're kind of fair game on everything.
Yeah.
Well,
if I didn't have a podcast, I would probably say yes, in part because I think the interviews that I have as a writer, the interviews I most enjoy doing are the ones that end up being more of a conversation anyway and less of an inquisition.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Exactly.
I would sort of suggest out to everybody. So I do a lot of cooking and I like to make crazy stuff. So I'm always watching YouTube. I watch YouTube. So anything I do now, I watch YouTube. But increasingly what I'm finding myself doing is I'm listening to a podcast first. Because a podcast you're going to have to be more descriptive. You're going to have to explain something. That's the beauty of something like This American Life on NPR. They get into so much detail that it sticks in your head where you almost don't need to see the visual. So I can see, at least I'm using podcasts more now when I do my search instead of YouTube, simply because of the descriptive aspect.
One of the marketing tools, and I'm sorry if you guys touched on this, I had to jump off and take a quick call, was we've used a tool called Headliner. It creates like small video clips with, you don't have to use video, you can use just a still image of the person you're talking to, but it creates a transcript that shows up on it'll put the transcript on the picture or on the video if that's what you're using, and you could clip it to whatever length you want to use it for. I know Instagram is only a minute, so that's we try to keep ours to like find a 1 minute clip of somebody talking. That's a fun way to create interesting content around the interview.
What are the advantages of the transcription? Because I'm getting emails about that, which seems crazy to me because it's an hour podcast and then they're going to read something that's going to, you know what I mean?
Right. No, for me, it's just for the purpose of that clip. And I think if people,
okay.
I understand in general people wanting a full transcript because there's an accessibility issue. For people it might be hard of hearing. I do understand that, and I'm not immune to that argument. But it's just I am one of 3 full-time staff, and I'm the only editorial staff. So like there's a limit to the amount I can personally take on. But for the purposes for a promotional purpose, for a 1 minute, it'll create a 1 minute, for a transcript that you could put on. You got to clean it up a little bit, but it's pretty high quality. And we made some, I've got one that I've got to push out later today. We had a interview with Minnesota's governor last week.
Yeah, if you're using YouTube for, this is important. If you're using YouTube for any of your promotions, being able to take a clip, and you can go more than 1 minute, right? Instagram, you can go a minute, but YouTube, you could give a segment. and you can use the pictures, and then you can put in the captions. It's a file called an SRT file. I'm going through that with a client right now. Let me just tell you that's interesting work. But the point is that in producing it, then people can read it, and so they can see the video and you can engage them. And again, by the way, these transcripts can be good content for your website. They need to go into their own area, but they can be a place where they read. And so I think we're getting kind of to Marshall's. It's like it goes full circle, right? First it's printed, then you read it, and then it gets printed again, right? So, but you say, but when you do that, you are now taking advantage of all the different media that you can use, the means of communication that you have. One thing that happens, and something that, Rhett and Black might want to think of, is when doing little video clips of them talking. And again, nowadays you get one of those little tripods that you put the phone on, and you set it up and you put it at the end of the coffee table, and you just do a little clip, and you do a little clip from the interview and say, hey, here's what's coming up in our next podcast, right? And you pick that kind of juicy or attention getting part, and then people are, well, look, I want to hear the whole thing. And here's where you go. You tell them in the teaser, here's where you go to start to subscribe. So Peter, can people do one-offs, or do you find that they end up always subscribing?
I don't even know. I don't even know how many subscribers I have. The way the analytics run or work is they're telling you how many people are actively engaged at a moment in time. So I don't know how many subscribers, because each like Apple has its own number of subscribers, Google has its own, yada, yada, yada. I'm just looking at like listens. How many listens am I getting?
Okay, cool.
And, and one tidbit, and this goes against all the editorial stuff. What I find is and this is horrible, but I find if you lead with like a question rather than a headline, a declaration, you're gonna get a hell of a lot more listens.
That's very Jewish.
It's also very good SEO, by the way. No, seriously, it is. Question headlines do better than the kind of printed in the newspaper, through one column, 3 deck. No. Put a question out there.
Yeah.
What's Black thinking today?
All right, everybody, we've had a wonderful time. And being mindful of everybody's time. It's already over an hour and 10 minutes worth of our participants' time. So please thank again to Hugo and to Peter for being here today. Thanks to everybody for being here and making this a very spirited conversation. And I've learned a lot. I hope that you all have as well. Hopefully people who were unable to join us will be able to see this later on, be posted. And anybody who's interested, all of the information that was shared on the presentation will be available after this. It'll be all mailed out to you by Laura. And thank you very much, Laura, for handling that as well. Again, I trust everybody will be with us. Coming up, I think next month, beginning of November, we have a webinar on the Blue Orchid Project for sharing Avenue revenue. Very important for American Jewish Press Association members. And we have a number of other meetings that are going to be going on, but that's, I believe, the next webinar. And then possibly Hugo and I will get together and we'll have another webinar coming up for November or early December. So I thank you all.
Early December.
Okay, so very much thank you, Peter. Been beautiful, and I'm going to try to use a little thing, a couple of things that I've heard from you, and I'm very interested and very energized and very intrigued by this whole prospect. Thank you.
You're going to love it. Good luck with it.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks, Peter. Thanks, Hugo.
Thanks very much.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye.